Welcome, everybody. This is TransParents, and I was about to say, I'm not sure where my there she is. I was about to say, where is she? Where is she? She's here.
Y'all,
She's
I'm so
muted.
sorry. I am not feeling well at all. Like at all. And I thought I was okay and I took a nap and I got up and I tried to get better and it's not working.
I was
I'm
gonna
going
say
to
you don't
let
look
you be wonderful and I'm going to go back to bed. Robert, I'm so
okay.
sorry I didn't get to listen or talk. This is a terrible first impression, but I just do not feel well.
Feel
I can see
better.
it. I
Thank you
can see it,
guys.
girl.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, bless her heart. Bless her heart. So it will be if she can she get herself off?
Not yet.
There she goes. I think she's about to. It's frozen her, so she's doing it. Hola. All right. Good evening, Dr. Diana. Derek is here. So I'm going to read. This is Robert, and he is joining us tonight. And I had a brief intro. So since we did the Jenny thing, let me start that over. Um, Welcome to tonight's episode of Transparents. Tonight we gather to honor the legacy of two pivotal figures in the LGBTQ history, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, and to discuss the recent efforts to erase their contributions. As we celebrate Black History Month, it's essential to recognize the intersectionality within our community and the profound impact that Black and Brown transgender women had on the fight for equality. Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera were at the forefront of the Stonewall Riot in 1969, a defining moment and the LGBTQ rights movement. Recently, the National Stonewall Monument made the deeply concerning decision to remove T, Q, and plus from their website and scrub information about Marsha and Sylvia. This act of erasure distorts the truth of our history and dishonors the contributions of these individuals. The Stonewall National Museum, which we have Robert from this evening, has issued a powerful statement condemning these changes. This blatant act of erasure not only distorts the truth of our history, but it also dishonors the immense contributions of transgender individuals, especially transgender women of color, who were at the forefront of the Stonewall riots and the broader fight for LGBTQ rights. We call for the immediate restoration of the word transgender on the website and vow to continue fighting for visibility and recognition. We are honored to have with us tonight Robert Keston, the Executive Director of the Stonewall National Museum, Archives, and Library. Robert will share insights onto the enduring legacy of Johnson and Rivera, the recent erasure efforts, and the significance of preserving our history accurately. Together, we'll discuss the importance of pushing back against these harmful actions and ensuring that the contributions of all members of our community are recognized and celebrated. So, welcome, Robert. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, oh, and Jeffrey, welcome, Jeffrey, as well. But yeah, so I guess where would you like to start? There's been a lot going on.
There's certainly a lot going on, and Stonewall is the National Monument is almost a sidestep to the major efforts here, which is to cause division within the LGBTQ community
Right,
and targeting a subgroup of brothers and sisters is the easiest way to cause dissension, and dissension causes disruption, and disruption causes bigger problems when people need to be united. If you can divide them, you gain power by that vacuum.
right,
And so this isn't really about any individuals, it's about creating a mess. And it has created a mess. And the truth of the matter is that historically, the LGBTQ plus community has overcome all the obstacles because we have always found a way to pull together in times of crisis. We
right,
don't always identify each other as we want to be identified. There weren't always the words we needed to
right,
explain who we were. So there are always those elements. There is racism, there is prejudice, there are all of those, there's misogyny. There are all those things in our community because our community is really the looking glass of the rest of the world because we're
right,
in every other community, every place around the world. So we can't expect that we're going to be that much different. We walk in all
right,
those shoes. But in this particular instance, we've got people whose amassed power by dividing people. And unfortunately, at this moment in time, the trans community is the low-hanging fruit.
Yes.
And there are enough people that are made nervous and uncomfortable within our own community because they don't understand the trans way of life, the trans mission, the trans people and what they think and what they feel. And so therefore, that makes them uncomfortable. And so that is really the crux of the matter, is that they're using our community as a target and a dividing rod. And by hitting Stonewall, which is, in my opinion, in the heart of everyone fighting for liberty and justice anywhere around the world, no matter what movement you're a part of.
Right.
And so by hitting that, they call into question our human rights and our civil rights and all that we have fought for the last 55 plus years.
Which is insane. To go back and try and erase something, to separate something, the G and the B. Which, I mean, Jenny and I have discussed that here on the show, just for example, that within those groups, again, within those populations, you're seeing this polarization. Either they're pushing back or they're stepping away from so that they're not targeted too. And when I look at that, to me, it's almost like a microscopic lens of, like you said, the larger population. And how we have some who are so gung-ho about pushing back against this community, while the rest of us are like, can't we all be human beings and accept one another? Like, I don't understand. It's again that same thing. You have this section that if you can create that division, then all of a sudden you can do whatever, you gain more power, you gain more control. And that's to me is what this is. And it's disturbing, the trend that they're on, trying to literally erase people, particularly trans, and what, for example, Marsha P. and Sylvia, just removing their names from the website. I was just like, how can you even, you're just removing the transgender from the website was enough to go, that was part of the movement. That was the intersection of the movement. How could you miss that? And it's obvious that it's on purpose, right, for the erasure effort. And I had discussed,
once again, it's not the erasure effort, and I think that it's important to recognize that this is a political move because they know that it makes people uncomfortable.
Right.
And so the reason they're targeting them as individuals or collectively, and more collectively than individuals, is because this is what divides people. Just like they've put out there, and I can't understand it for the life of me, but I do understand its intention, that you hear people saying, I do not want to send my elementary school child to school and have them come back as another sex. Well, anybody who has ever thought knows that going to kindergarten or second grade or fourth grade, they don't do surgery in the school. And if they did,
it's amazing how many people believed that, because
so my point is, though, that it's not so much erasure as their key point, because if it's erased, then they can't use it any longer to divide people. It's to create all these auras about how dangerous, how awful, how disruptive these group of people are, even if they're only 3 or 4 or 2% of the overall population. So it's very easy to go after them because in their minds, they know they're not that many. So no matter how they fight back, if you destroy any coalition that they would be part of by targeting them, you make the group that can come back and fight you smaller and smaller and smaller, because the larger group of gays, lesbians, and bis, they're hoping will say, nope, we are going to save ourselves. And if it means not discussing trans women in sports, if it means not discussing Sylvia and Marsha P., if it means not watching a TV show with Laverne Cox, then I will do that because I just want to be
Right.
safe. The reason they're doing it is to make you
Ooh.
feel unsafe.
Right, right. And Jay had a point there he put up there about like his kids couldn't even get Tylenol at school. Like that was like the crazy, and that to me is kind of the disconnect that there are people that I don't associate with, but that I do know who honestly believe that there are kids who go to school and have these surgeries and are sent home. And I'm like, and I know for a fact that your kid, you get a telephone call if your child is running a fever and they need a Tylenol. The same thing for me when my children were in school. And why they can believe something that is that distorted, while they're willing to believe something that is that distorted, again goes to the length of how far they've been pushed to fear, right? That
Absolutely.
this is a you can't you've got to stay away from them. They're grooming your kids at school, or parents are grooming their kids, or whatever nonsense they want to put to it. But it is again to create this division. Um, Division, divide, and again, like the more you to create that chaos, the more people don't want to talk about it. And I think that's why Jenny and I kind of came out doing the show, was because people didn't want to talk about trans rights. And or honestly, like as parents, we found that a lot of people were uncomfortable, and it was like, well, why are you uncomfortable? And when I started doing my audio room on LinkedIn, I think a lot of the first people that came to the rooms weren't parents. They were social workers. They were nurses. They were teachers that weren't necessarily educated on how to uphold community, right? How to uphold autonomy of the trans and community. So whether it was like their patient, their student, they wanted to know what they could do to go further for them. And that created a conversation on how do we support trans people more. And I think by having this other end of the spectrum where you've got, shouty capitals about fear them and their mutilation and scariness, is so we won't talk about it. Because the more we talk about it, the more normalized it is. And not normalized as in there's something to normalize, but the more it is that it's just in normal conversations and we're not aghast and shocked to talk about it. We're not afraid to talk about it. And I think that is another part of this fear, is to stir up so people will again stop talking about it. Because if you stop talking about it, they don't have to have rights.
Or they'll just express their fears.
Right? Even more so. Which then kind of, in a way, if you've gotten the trans community scared and running, oh look how reactive they are. See, we told you. And that they're trying to use that as proof of their point, when really they're the ones that stirred the pot in the first place.
Well, and there's no small wonder that the primary target is trans women of color, because
Right.
two other elements of this disservice to American citizens are women and people of
Right.
color. Because as we know, those planes are going down because DEI has allowed women and people of color into working in aerospace. So
Right.
those planes are crashing,
Or
and
into the fire departments, and they cause, the forest
right,
fires
but
in
only in
California.
California.
Right. Right. Only in California. No in the other forest fires anywhere else, but just California. Um, and and, and again, I think that makes it hyperbolic. Those topics, right? It creates that fear again. That polarization that people it drives fear. It makes people anxious,
Well,
and that
they
anxiety, then they don't want to touch it.
play on people's insecurities, and as we know from the last election and two elections ago, white women are uncomfortable voting for women. And therefore, if you say that women are the cause of some of these problems, there are a good number of white women, certainly uneducated or uninformed white women,
Right.
which is a large part of our population, unfortunately, will tend to agree with that. And so they become uncomfortable because many of them have said, and they certainly find them to interview them, that they don't think that women should be in executive positions, or women should be elected to office, because women can't be trusted to make those kinds of decisions. And that comes from women. And that is really a curse
Insane.
of the dumbing down of Americans.
Yes.
When we've dumbed ourselves down to a point where we accept marginalizing people within our own community.
Right. Right.
And
I grew up in
certainly,
a household in the South, and that was kind of that mentality that the man is right, rules the roost, says how things go, says what happens. Like, this is exact, and not. I got a divorce, and I remember my grandmother saying something to me about it, and I looked at her and I was like, I didn't want to be you in 15 more years. And like my whole family just kind of, did you really just say that to her? And I was like, she's the one that didn't want to celebrate her anniversary because she lived in that type of marriage, and that she knew what she had given up and accepted that, but I was made of something different, and I couldn't accept it. I did it for a while, and then realized, nope. 30s hit, and no, the brakes came off, and then the divorce came on. Yes, if they were seen as mentally ill, we can't be telling the truth. Jay, that is also the point. That's the reason why they want to go into, oh, it's all gender dysphoria, it's all a mental illness, and it's like, no, that is a code in the DSM. It is a condition, but that is not every experience. Again, just because you have every person who has MS doesn't have the same symptoms. Again, same thing. You can't put those labels on people, and they're currently really busy about the labels or removing of labels at the moment. Like, let's just wipe all of this off. Sanction who is this, who is that. And really that's kind of what happened. Like when, and I'll pull that up. So the reason why, let me see where his EO is. Okay, so the recent removal of the transgender reference from Stonewall National Monument website was the result of an executive order signed on the new administration's first day in office, mandating the federal government define sex only as male or female. This order led to the removal of references to transgender and queer individuals from various federal websites, including the Stonewall National Monument. The executive order has been widely criticized for its impact on the LGBTQ+ community, particularly trans individuals, and has been seen as an attempt to erase the contributions of transgender people from historical narratives. And they're just, and again, when you talk about Marsha, like Marsha and Sylvia were that intersection. They were trans women of color. And we know that they're the highest targeted. We also know that they're the least investigated. They're the least reported. They're the least talked about. We had a special episode that we just did on TikTok with TransParents past week to hold space for Sam. Because again, like, it's just not talked about how targeted this community is. And really, when we start talking about this stuff going on, these EOs, they're actually amplifying the violence. They're amplifying hate. They're amplifying, or they're at least trying to spark it, if you will, against this community, again, to get them to silence themselves.
Once again, I just caution that it's not targeting the community to target the community, because by and large, those people don't care. Right. They are targeting the community to divide the population. This is the easiest community to go after, and this builds up a reservoir of goodwill within the people that they most need to support them. So I think it almost makes it worse that they're targeting people that they don't really care about one way or the other, to use for personal gain, for personal power, for gaining authority over the rest of the population. So not only, in a sense, are they discarding these people, not only are they criminalizing these people, but they're not even doing it because they care or even necessarily believe the things that they're saying. They're doing it in order to gain something for themselves. And that, I
Right.
think, is the most callous part of this whole experience, is that they are willingly destroying other people and putting them at risk in order to gain something for themselves, not because they hold any deep-seated beliefs about
Right.
this community.
And I think what's worse is because we talk about, granted, Jenny and I are both of our sons are adults now, but I do have families that I work with that their children do feel like this is an absolute direct attack, right? Like they do. Small kids feel like they are being erased. I've got children who don't even like, they're doing the social confirmations of gender affirming care right now. They're not even at a level to really begin accessing care. But at the same time, they're petrified that
As
they're
they
not
should.
going to be able to, right? Because again, they're seeing this constant derogatory language, discrimination against them coming from the top echelons of government, and nobody's stopping it. And then you've got other people, whether you talk about your politicians, whether you talk about pastors, whether you talk about teachers, you have all these other different groups who are also saying the same pushback. So for them, for the youth, I do feel like in ways that they do, in ways feel like that's what they're coming up against, that they're coming up in a world that is trying to, erase their existence. Like, okay, if you're saying that I can't be who I am in school and my doctors can't give me care and my parents' insurance won't even cover me, and you're erasing people of the past who already fought for this access, what does that mean for me in my lifetime? And I do
It,
think that is and unfortunately, that is what I don't like about this, is they are creating fear
absolutely.
for a group who doesn't deserve it, right? Where you're stoking fear for your base, but for this population, you are creating fear and harm for no reason other than, like you said, for their own political gain. They
Right.
don't care who they hurt. And
Absolutely.
it is true. It is truly hurtful. Truly hurtful.
And truly dangerous.
Right. Right. Especially for kids who are not in the best place. I unfortunately lost 2 clients right after he was elected because of fear, because of their own fear. And to think that we put children in that place in this country just because of who was elected, definitely isn't the America that I thought I was a part of growing up, right? I didn't see this on the horizon. And now that my children are adults, all of them, um, I wince almost. Like, oh, I didn't know it was gonna. I, I thought we were going to progress.
And we will. But unfortunately, the big growth will come out of this downturn.
Right.
And it is how we prepare and how we challenge that will allow us to get to that next big step forward. And that's really, to some extent, what we should all be thinking of, is how do we prepare ourselves and make this work for us by putting those who would disrupt and divide on the defensive rather than allowing them to continue being on the offensive.
Right.
Because
And I
when
think
you
I think that is a big thing that I think a lot of their playbook again is about that fear tactic, right? That as long as we don't talk about the existence of trans people, then we can't give them rights. We can deny, deny, deny. I can sit over here and spew my hatred and say that there's only 2 sexes, and that, and honestly, the fact that they've gone in and gutted just about every department of their heads and science and the things that we base our medicine, our health care on. It's scary for me today because I wanted to be a nurse. And so I went to health advocacy instead. And so when I look at some of the things that are being change even within healthcare, just like without, and on an EO that is honestly is not been vetted because it actually goes against precedent and goes against laws that have already in place. And then to see like children's hospitals roll back and say, we're not going to give gender affirming care except for mental health supports because we don't want to lose our research funding. You're a children's hospital. Who are you supposed to be standing up for? And those are the people that are being harmed when he goes in and does this stuff that's really for performance. Again, and it's for performance. Because I have to argue with people, not argue, but if someone says to me like, oh, that they shouldn't have health care, how does it take away from yours? How does a trans person having any access, any rights, take away someone else's? It doesn't. And we've gotten to this place where it's supposed to be he or me, not a we. And I don't know where we got in that divide because we have to be able to talk about it.
Well, the divide comes from history. People have always believed that if someone gets something that they won't, because people don't look at the reality that's around them. 200 years ago, how many people had cars? Nobody had a television. Now people have all of those things. It wasn't like if one person got one, you weren't going to get one.
Right.
The stock market was at a few hundred. Now it's at multiple thousands. That means money is being made and more people have access to resources. So when people see it as that proverbial pie, and if you get a bigger slice, my slice has to be smaller, they don't understand. They don't look at the reality, which is that's not how it works.
Right.
It's not a pie. It's not something that's divided in that fashion. In fact, the only way it gets divided is when the 1% takes yours.
Right.
There's enough to go around. There's enough to go around many times over. But the true elite, who are now causing the problems that they're causing and using trans people in order to create that divide or maximize that divide, are taking. Elon Musk keeps getting contracts from governments all over the world for billions of dollars, hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, while he cuts children's health care, while he cuts education, while he cuts transportation, while he cuts everything else. He's making scores of dollars and scores of rubles and scores of euros.
And anything else he can get a hold of.
That's exactly right. And so that's why looking at the big picture becomes so important, because as you said, and it's absolutely true, nobody loses rights because someone else gains rights. And in reality, if you work in the area of human or civil rights, you understand that when the people that are at the bottom of the pile do well, everyone else does better.
Right.
So when you give rights to trans women of color and equalize them with the other people in society, everybody's level and life quality goes up.
Right.
And when you see it the opposite, it's because you just don't want to be at the bottom of the pile.
Right.
Because the slave owners used to tell, as they used to call them, poor white trash, that if slavery goes, you move to the bottom of the pile. So you fight for us to keep those slaves, because then there's always someone you can boss around. There's always someone you can kick that will not get you in trouble. There's always someone under you. But the minute they free those slaves, you go to the bottom of the pile. And that's what people are very much afraid of. So as long as there's someone that we can take something from, that elevates them and makes them feel a little bit better about themselves. And that's because, once again, we have created a society that has been so dumbed down that we can believe the most foolish things, like the people who get interviewed on TV that still believe the earth is flat.
Right, right. And Dr. Diana put up here a recent Gallup. I did see this poll reports that LGBTQ individuals equal now 9.7% of the US population. And I think that's because more and more feel safer to come out. And I wouldn't even say even safer now, as much as even more now possibly are feeling more empowered to say, you're not going to erase me. You keep saying we don't exist, but we do exist. And so I think that you do have more people who feel safer or more empowered to speak that, right? To speak their truth and to say
I
that
also think that there are more
you're not going to erase
words.
me.
There are also more words that describe how we feel about ourselves and our identity. And so
Yes.
people are using those words. You know, at
Right.
one time there were no words,
Right.
and people behaved in a certain way, but they didn't have anything to call it. And now you do. And so if you feel non-binary, you can say that word because that word now exists.
Right.
5 years
Right.
ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, those words didn't exist. So you wouldn't have heard it. And those people might have said, I'm male or female. And now they can say what they are and how they feel. And what does that mean? And the whole idea with both mental health and wellness, everything is on a
Spectrum.
Thank you. And sexuality is on that spectrum too, because everything is on that spectrum. And a spectrum means that you can go from one end to another end or somewhere off middle at any given time. Just like they say that most adults in the United States experience a mental crisis at least once in their life. Well, that means the other times you're not experiencing a crisis, but you can be moving closer or further away. This is on a spectrum. And so now we have more and more words that allow us to understand and explain closer to who we are. And I think that that's one reason those numbers will continue to rise on being queer, because I don't have to be all of one thing or all of another. I can be somewhere in the middle and fluctuate, because I'm not worried about what other people think of me, but I have to be able to be honest with myself on where I am and where I am today and where I'll be tomorrow.
Right. And I think we actually, last week we were talking about Polly Murray, because again, the language, there wasn't language around it. She referred to herself, even as a child, as her he, she personality. And younger in life would occasionally, with pictures of herself, would write the dude or Pete, or like use masculine names, or put he, him, or they, them pronouns. And then later in life went back to feminine. But at the same time, she was considered non-binary, but there wasn't the language to describe that at that point in time. And I do think you're right that because we are developing more language, people have a better understanding of where they might categorically fit in that, whereas maybe before they didn't feel like there was a place for them. And Jay actually brought up an interesting. It also drives charity and nonprofit philanthropy. If there is no one poor, we can't feel ethical about being rich. Yeah, no, I mean that was something to. Didn't those pick up right after we took the wealth cap off?
Well, Jay will have a lot to feel good about, because with the changes in federal policy, with the changes in many state policies, with the dismantling of DEI, grants from government, grants from foundations, grants from corporation are vanishing. So hopefully rich individuals will dig much deeper into their pockets and make up some of those contributions that are absolutely 100% disappearing and have disappeared for many of organizations, including ours, literally overnight. We got our last check from the NEA, with followed 2 days later by an email saying, no more money for you guys unless you can do a program that's geared towards celebrating America, that is open to everyone, all members of the family, all age groups. Well, that's code for nothing that's LGBTQ, because they all believe that that's not open to all age groups and all members of the
Right.
family. So
Right.
we went from getting tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars from different federal agencies to zero. We're based in Florida. From the state, we get zero. So
Right.
all of those things are gone. And yet we have an important mission to carry on. So I hope Jay is right that rich people trying to feel good will make up the difference of the many millions of dollars that are now not available to so many organizations that are doing important work across the United States.
Right. And I hate it because I feel like there's more elite on the opposite side of the ones that would be giving to these charities, right?
I don't truly know if that's true.
Right. I don't truly know if that's true either. It seems like it. And I don't want to believe that though. I feel like there are good intentions out there. I feel like there are good people out there.
It
Not
doesn't mean they're
necessarily
generous, but
right. Not necessarily that they're generous, right?
but when you look
But
at the Clintons and the Obamas and all of those people, they have lots of rich friends, super rich friends. They are super rich themselves. So there's a lot of money on both sides of the aisle, on all sides of the philosophy. It
right,
just doesn't mean that that money will ever filter
make it
down to the organizations that need it the most.
right. And I do think there needs to be a momentum of that. I feel like right now in particular, just because of the onslaught of misinformation, disinformation, and that's not even on a U.S. level. That's a global perspective. We've been contacted by a doctor out of the UK who the NHS over there pretty much targeted, went after, had her license removed. She finally got it back. Then they changed like the coursework and what the requirements were for her to recertify so that they could remove it again, because she did gender affirming care. And she's reached out because we did the cast review not too long ago, and she wants to come on and speak to how it impacted her, because the UK is a lot worse with the cast review. Granted, a lot of our GOP here use it to try and use it to back up their anti-trans, agenda, but over there they did ban gender affirming care under the age of 18. So for her group in particular, who she was helping, they lost access, whether it was had her license or not. They lost all access. And that again is, you're not paying attention to what is happening, because they are doing much bigger things. Jenny and I talk about it. There's a phrase, and I always forget what the Latin is for it, but it's bread and circuses. And this goes back to Roman times, where they would go in and create like, hey, you can have your parties, you can have your festivals, and we're going to give you some wine and some bread, and we'll donate some of this to it. Meanwhile, they were stripping you of your land, stripping you of your rights, taking all these different things from you, increasing your taxes, whatever it be. And that's kind of what's going on in the background here. Oh, well, hey, look, we're writing all these executive orders on trans people to make you safe. What are they actually taking from you? Because that wasn't doing anything to most people's lives before, unless you were someone who was trans, or you were a family member of someone who was trans, and you were worried about their access to care, depending on your location. Because that's, for here, I'm in North Carolina. For right now, we have it. In the South, I feel like North Carolina is one of the more hesitant to move quickly, because we got slapped with HB2, because we were the first one to try and pass a bathroom ban, and we lost billions. And so we had one Republican governor who had passed it, and the next Republican governor said, I have to get rid of this because we're losing too much money. Nobody would come here. We were losing medical research grants. Federal medical research grants were like one of the largest medical research areas in the Southeast, and the Research Triangle Park. NCAA. They weren't coming in to play basketball games. Like, we were losing billions, and it was like, yeah, that's egg on our faces. So we kind of slowed down. We definitely have tried to put some out there, but I don't think we've been nearly as aggressive as other red states with our anti-trans legislation. I believe for that reason, because they just know they don't quite have the support they need. And now that we have blue for both a lieutenant governor and governor, I really feel like that kind of, and we don't have red majority proof, thank goodness. In both of our houses this term, we don't have to worry about necessarily what we were worried about last term with things that we couldn't block, even if we wanted to. We couldn't veto them out of place and protect people. And I do feel like we have a little bit more of a chance to do that here in North Carolina now. I guess in the long run, where do you see this heading?
Well, like I said, in the very long run, I think it will not only come out better and stronger. My hope, though, is that we will also learn from this experience, and in that learning process, not become complacent and apathetic again, which is where
Right.
many people still are right now, partly out of fear, but partly out of they don't know. And ignorance is a very dangerous thing in a democracy that demands an informed electorate. And out of all the
Right.
democracies on the planet, ours is much more reliant on an informed electorate than the parliamentary systems. So I am
Right.
hoping that we will learn the lessons as well as our enemies have learned those lessons. And what I mean by that is Anita Bryant was all the way back in the 70s. And a lot of people don't know who Anita Bryant is or was anymore. And Anita Bryant spearheaded Save the Children, parental rights, Christianity, white Christian nationalism. And I had two groups on different days from different schools, both high schools from Miami, which is where Anita practiced her work. And when they came in, we went through our archives, and I took out something from the Anita Bryant era, and they didn't know who Anita Bryant was. She did her work in Miami. These were high school students studying gender issues, and they didn't know who she was. So when I said, okay, you don't know who she is, do you know the term parental rights? Do you know the term save our children? And they said, oh, that's Ron DeSantis, who, as you know, is the current governor of Florida. And I said, no, that's Anita Bryant. And if you would have known that, if you would have studied how Anita Bryant accomplished what she did, you would see where Ron DeSantis took what she did, saw where she failed, and implemented all of those things so he could make this terrible negative progression in his legislation and agenda. I said, the problem is that they learned. We sat back and waited and then were bamboozled when they acted. And the other part of that is that the only reason Ron DeSantis may not be sitting in the White House right now is that he didn't understand that gay marriage is not really a very big issue right now. Now, it may become an issue again, I don't know, but same-sex marriage isn't the big, scary thing that it once was.
That it was.
And he used anti-gay and anti-Black to try to move his career forward. So when he hit the national scene to run for president, all of a sudden there was pushback on the national level, and he couldn't gain traction in the states that he needed. The Trump team, on the other hand, was much smarter, and they put certain gay people in positions both in the campaign and then later in the administration. They pick gay people who are very uncomfortable with trans and with non-binary and all of those kinds of things. So they skirted that issue, forcing Ron DeSantis right out of the election, minimizing his power and prestige and boosting their own by saying, see, we're not really prejudiced.
Right.
The secretary the Treasury Secretary of the United States of America is a gay man. But that does not mean that they are our friends. That does
No.
not mean that they are putting us on that arch to justice that Martin
Right.
Luther King Jr. used to speak about. So
Right.
we cannot allow ourselves to be complacent. We cannot allow ourselves to be apathetic. We must be informed and educated. And so my hope is, and I believe based on the historic record, that we will move forward. But we just don't know how many people will pay the price for our being lazy and uninformed for all these years previously.
Right.
And that's what we have to do. We have to really prepare ourselves to take the initiative, to take the offensive, and to tear down the walls that they're building that separate us as human beings from one another. We are the children of
Right.
the rainbow. And that means that we have a fundamental obligation to unify people and put down the divisions. We are not the dividers, we are the unifiers. And as
Right.
Noah found the rainbow at the end of 40 days and 40 nights of rain, that rainbow symbolized peace and prosperity on the earth. And we have adopted that rainbow. We were gifted that rainbow to outstretch our hands and bring people in, not to divide and conquer.
Right.
And so,
Or to push them out. Or to push them out.
you can't push them out if you're all under the same rainbow.
Right. Right. And oh yeah, yeah. So much I could. Well, there's so much there. Just in that statement, because it always goes back to, again, how you control people, right? And if people are fearful, they are very easily manipulated.
Absolutely.
And like you said, if you're not educated, if you're not aware of what the agenda is, of what the real information is, then you're believing the agenda instead. And if that aligns closer to where you feel comfortable, then definitely the more you're going to attach yourself to it, because you don't want to be in discomfort. You want to be comfortable. And people don't want to get uncomfortable.
And you also want somebody to blame for your misfortune.
That too. That too. We unfortunately like to play the blame game. It's their fault. It's their fault. And that's currently, unfortunately, what I feel like his administration is trying to do. Actually, I don't think they're trying. They most definitely are. That is
Every
very
day.
clear what they're trying to do. But they won't. They won't. One person's opinion does not erase fact. Lots of people's opinions don't erase fact. Don't know if he's been told that or not,
but they obscure facts.
Yes. And
And
that is another. That's
and
another.
we see that in China, we see that in Iran, we see that in Russia, we see that in many places around the world, including Western democracies. You know,
right.
We do not teach history, we teach biography. And
right.
so we never really know how those people who became successful. We do not know how they were helped. So we convince ourselves in the United States, our individualism, our raw individualism did it. We pulled ourselves up on by our own bootstraps. Nobody does it by themselves ever. They had parents, they had friends, they had teachers, they had bankers, they had lawyers, whoever they had in their lives, friends. Nobody did it all by themselves. And yet that is our myth. And that's because we teach biography. We do not teach history. And
Agreed.
If we want to really learn how to become a better nation, a more perfect union, better people, then we have to start learning history, which is much more difficult than learning biography.
Right. It is, because you have to approach really uncomfortable truths as a North Carolinian, a rural, like growing up in a very small town. I was very racist. I was very homophobic. I was very transphobic. And a lot of that intersection within my religion and how it was raised that all these things were evil or satanic or will send you to hell. Like that was how everything was framed. And I had to move away from that small town once became an adult and a very young parent and unpack a lot of it and then go, what? This, that, this doesn't, okay. So maybe because I was younger, that made sense, but this doesn't track now. This doesn't make sense to me. And so I had to do a lot of unpacking, and I was lucky that I did those things before my child came out to me, because it would have been a really bad experience. And I'm grateful every day that I did not inflict that harm upon him. But that's when we start talking about changing history, erasing history, then we erase those lessons that we learned.
Well, the thing is that the reality is what you're talking about doesn't get taught anyway. There are very few classes in high school or junior high school that have ever said the name Marsha P. Johnson.
Nope.
So that history is not taught. So erased is, once again, I fear that word sometimes because it makes people think
maybe not. I guess the unmentioned, would that be better?
It's probably better, but it has always been unmentioned largely.
Right.
And our job is to bring what has been hidden into the light.
Right.
We have to remember that all the way back when this nation started, there was a president, George Washington. He had a vice president named John Adams, who served as vice president for 8 years and then 4 years as president. Now, many people don't know that his wife and children, Abigail Adams and his children, lived in Braintree, Massachusetts. Why? Because there was no real salary for the president or the vice president, and Abigail ran their farm.
Right.
It's because there was an Abigail Adams and Adams' children that John Adams was able to be John Adams. Right. But if we don't know that, we only know that John Adams did X, Y, and Z as a founder of this nation. That's not history. That's biography. If we look at George Washington, who took no salary as general when he fought the Revolutionary War. Yes, George Washington had some resources, but Martha Washington was rich. So they were able to do certain things because of slavery, because she inherited from her first husband all these natural resources.
Right.
That's knowing our history. How did George Washington become George Washington? It wasn't because of his bootstraps.
No.
It was because of all those people who made the boots. And the same for John Adams, and the same for every other successful person, male, female, or other, in the history of our world.
I think it's the reason why I can't stand the term self-made. Nobody's self-made.
Not without an egg and a sperm, that's for sure.
Right.
So they're already not self-made. But the point being that until we understand that history is this very, very densely woven fabric with every single thread being somebody else's story. And once we remove threads, we remove any notion that we're learning history. And now we're just learning selective history or biography.
Right.
So the denser that rug, the denser that fabric, the more we are learning about how we got to where we are, what happened before us, and that all helps us move into the future. So once again, the future is bright if we take advantage of all that we have. If we do not, we will continue to live with the same things, the same errors, the same mistakes over and over again. Not that they repeat, because history does not repeat. The facts are always there. There's always hate, there's always love, there's always ignorance, there's always brilliance, there's always creativity. They're all there. It's what we let rise to the surface, and different things push things to the surface. It's not a pendulum. The pendulum idea means that we really have no control over anything.
Right.
That's a cop out. Oh, it swung all the way this way. It will come back. No, it doesn't just come back. We have to make it come back, and we have to
Right. Takes work.
understand why it went this way and why it's going this way. It's not something that's in the books that says, I'm sorry, when the moon is full, it will always be like this because of nature. It's not. So we've got to get these concepts that make it simple to be
Right.
thrown away, because it's not simple. Human beings are complicated.
We're very complicated. And there's all these, like you said, all these layers to it that if you don't want to sit down, if you're not willing to approach them, it makes it very difficult to have any kind of useful conversation. I think one of the most difficult classes I took in college, and I didn't go to college till my early 30s, was global prejudice. And it was this class where we were kind of put in groups, and you were given assignments each week to present. So that we would have like 5 of us, 5 groups present each week on these different prejudices around the world, and how each was being viewed from the other side of it, to understand the complexities that went into that dynamic. And I really had never understood, I think, probably how many layers, how many interconnections there truly were until that class. And again, that was me also beginning to unpack all these different layers within myself, that I was like, wait, am I doing that? Ooh, I am. So, but it helped me learn. And I just think sometimes people don't necessarily want to learn either. We're comfortable in our untruths. We don't necessarily want to take off the rose-colored glasses. And I think that's
It's
something
hard.
that we have to have that conversation too. Like the parents, some of the parents that I work with, they don't want to take off the glasses. It's like, no, my kid's not this. I raised them this way. I'm not like this. This is my political belief. This is our religious belief. How could my child believe this? And I'm like, and typically I have to kind of do a gut check with them. And it's like, okay, I want you to go back to when you were a teenager and think about when you lived with your parents. Was there anything that they said or did that you despised, that you swore when you became a parent, or when you got out of your house you would never do again? And typically there's like a few, oh, oh. I'm like, okay, now I need you to imagine that your kid might have a different viewpoint on things than you do. Again, because your child is somebody different than who you are. They're separate of you. And so sometimes you have to have that. You have to get people to back up enough to take the glasses off. But I feel like we have a population right now who just want to like Velcro these on and keep them on and never take them off, or bury their heads in the sand and never bring them out. And that's just not reality. And I think that's when we group together, those of us who like to educate, and we just keep pushing to educate. That's the reason why Jenny and I started this show, was no matter what, as long as we kept having these little conversations, hopefully that would ripple out into more people having conversations. And not to normalize it, but to normalize that it's okay to talk about. It's not something dangerous. It's not something perverse or whatever that they're trying to frame it as. It's like talking about any other relationship with any other person in your life. Because again, my kid is no different than my other 2 children. I love them just as much. And I think when you can break it down to that level and get people to really see the humanity, and it sucks that we have to remind people to be human. It abhors me that we have to remind people to be human. But I know there are times in my life where somebody's had to remind me. So I just try and give that grace and just go, okay, well, how about if we look at it from a different light, a different perspective? And yeah, I hope, actually, I don't hope. I know we're going to get better. I don't know how fast, but I know we're going to get better. It just, yeah, it takes more and more of us willing to keep talking about it and not let this blowback, this pushback that's coming out right now discourage us. Because I
And
know
we
it can be
have to take
very easily
action
discouraging,
beyond talking.
right? I mean, it's action too. Like whether you're calling your senators, whether you're going to local boards or big community, county, state, wherever you're going. Jenny and I think Jenny actually is speaking at her state capitol soon. But as long as we keep doing our parts to keep pushing it forward, that's and sometimes we even have to gut check ourselves on that. Jenny and I got asked to be part of something that we're both kind of now not quite sure on because it feels like maybe the people who are creating this documentary, while their intentions are good, I don't know that they've thought their project out all the way through. And what they were asking, I think, could put people in danger, a lot of people in danger. And so I didn't like smack back at them, but I just kind of reminded them. I was like, I work with families of youth, and kids are scared. And if you're talking about doing a documentary on this, I don't necessarily think they wanted to talk with families, full families, the kids as well. Go with the kids to therapy sessions. And I was like, that's not smart. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be ugly. I understand you're trying to add light to this, but if you're going to add light to it, you need to do it in a way that's helpful and not that can get them targeted. I was like, because the second you release this documentary, we know two people that both have their own social platforms that are going to put this list of names out. And I was like, and I'm not sure that you've thought about that and about what you're asking people to put out of themselves, of children. So yeah, so we both kind of were like, we talked about it afterwards, and I was like, I'm not so sure about that one now. Yeah, so if we're gonna wait for them to get back with us, we may not hear back from them. That's okay. That's okay. I just was like, look, you've got to know what you're asking is a lot from parents of young children right now to go out and put their kids at risk. No, no. That's the one thing I encourage parents not to do. Don't put your kid out there. Don't expose your kid. Jenny and I, when we talk about it, like I don't share my kid's name. Like I've said it before, like that's not information. Like I don't even have them out on my social media because again, it's a protection mechanism. It's one thing for me to speak for the community because I want to. It's his choice whether he has to, and he wants to live his life. And so if he's fine doing his own thing, that's where I want him because I think that's where everybody should. I don't think the trans community should have to fight their own fight.
They
That's
should,
any community. I mean, that's
they
any
should, right.
community,
They should be allowed to be human beings in
right?
the world.
Right?
Nobody should have to apologize for who they are.
And not even apologize, defend themselves.
But it's the same
To say
sort of
that,
thing when
right?
you
Well,
get
yeah,
there and you're defending yourself, it's because you're saying, I'm sorry, this is who I am, but accept me.
right,
And you don't
right.
have to do that.
No,
You
no,
don't have to
I don't
defend
think so
yourself
either.
because you're not apologizing for who you are.
No, never, never,
Right.
please. Never, never. Well, Robert, we have come to the top of our hour. But I want to thank you so much. I'm sorry Jenny couldn't join us this evening, but thank you so much for coming on here, for sharing. And definitely, I'm hoping that maybe there's a big donor out there listening right now. You can send money toward the National Archive. They need funding. It's been cut. You can help anybody out there who's listening who wants to help. They'll be happy to take your donations.
Absolutely.
Right. Anything that we can do to keep the mission going. With that, next week we have, I forget his last name, but Alexander with Arrive Therapy will be coming on, and we'll be talking about some of the adverse childhood effects with some of the things that are coming out and some of the things that we need to be doing to support our youth right now who are living through the current climate, how we can support them better. So join Jenny and I next week for that, and Alexander. But thank you, Robert, again. Derek says he's writing a check now, although he winked, so we'll see about that one. I hear you, Derek. If you know people, Derek, send it, which he's good for that, so we'll see. But thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I really hope maybe this will get some attention. Maybe you will get some money, some donations to come in, and let me know so I can like go out there and I'll put out a
I
special.
certainly
Thank you all for
will.
donating.
Thank
All
you for
right.
doing what you do. It's really important.
Thank you. You're welcome. I like to talk, but at the same time, it's a population that I noticed between nursing school and my health advocacy degree, with my kid coming out, that weren't being supported, that I could just visually see. There wasn't education in the school programs. It was lacking on the floor. And I just knew that it was something I needed to bring attention to. That's how we change things, is call out the things that aren't working.
Have a wonderful evening and thank you.
Thank you. You too. Good night,
Bye.
Robert. Good night, everybody. See y'all next week. Bye.